Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for this topic regarding public funding for arts and culture. It is absolutely something, it's a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I've been involved with it almost from inception in this county, and also critically prepared to work with others to help us with the tasks that lie ahead. So I'm very excited. Before we get started on that topic, I want to share a little bit about who we are at Arts Cleveland. So who is Arts Cleveland? We are an advocate working to represent the interests of arts and culture in government, civic, and philanthropic contexts. We serve as an ally, offering knowledge, skills, resources, and connections to help support creative vitality. And we are an ambassador working to highlight and facilitate connections between the arts and arts and culture sector and other community sectors. So on the subject of public funding for arts and culture, I want to start a little bit with some framing on this. You know, we've seen over time a number of questions that have come up from people asking, how did we even get to this, or what will it take to solve some of the circumstances before us at the local level with public funding? And so we thought it would be useful to do a level set with everyone to kind of give some perspective on what it took the last time, and shape that up as everyone, you know, sort of looks to the future given the circumstances we're in. So some recent questions have come up, and we think it's a good time to kind of look back. We have a lot to cover over the course of this next 50 minutes, and I might not be able to get to every question that you might have, but we're here day in, day out, working on behalf of the arts and cultural community. So if there is a question that you have that we're not able to get to today, I would encourage you to reach out, come in, have a conversation, and I'm happy to do that at any time. So I want to start with the first part of the work that took place in Cleveland in the mid-90s. This was a really difficult time for the arts and cultural community. And the decision was made that something needed to happen to upset the state of affairs at the time, really to position the arts and culture sector for the better. And how did that transpire? It was a call to action on the part of the Cleveland Foundation that said that there was a lack of a community-wide comprehensive arts and cultural planning process. There was no arts and culture plan in this region, and the kinds of things that were being used in that report to describe the arts and culture sector at the time were terms like unresolvable financial crisis, instability, threatened, lacking resources, chronic, endemic crises, undercapitalized, closing their doors. This was what was going on in the mid-90s in Cleveland when it came to arts and culture. So the Cleveland Foundation commissioned this study. It was done in partnership with McKinsey, and the outcome said, what we really need to do here is to develop an arts and cultural plan. Our organization, which is now Arts Cleveland, which used to be Community Partnership for Arts and Culture, or for many of you who knew us as CPAC, was formed specifically for this purpose of creating an arts and cultural plan. We did 9 major research studies looking at everything from participation to arts impact to arts and culture health. We did 42 regional public forums over the course of those 2.5 years, engaging thousands of the region's residents, and eventually coming up with 4 goals: to increase access to arts and culture, to create opportunities for lifelong learning, to build partnerships between the arts and cultural community and among the arts and cultural community and other partners, and to secure resources to support arts and culture. We evolved as an organization coming out of that process, with one of our chief efforts being focused on securing a dedicated resource to support arts and culture at the local level. So coming out of the cultural plan process, we then moved pretty quickly into working with the city. At the time, Cleveland City Councilman Joe Simperman was very interested in wanting to build off of the momentum from the planning process and see if the city might be able to do something on its end. And there were 2 arts and cultural summits. Some of you may have been a part of those. And essentially they came out with a series of recommendations. There were 2 that were held, and a series of recommendations regarding what they could do. Some policies did advance as a result of that. We had the Percent for Art ordinance, a live work overlay district that was adopted at the time or shortly thereafter. So we knew that public funding for arts and culture was a big concern here, that unlike every other major US city that had developed public funding, because of our really wonderful philanthropic sector, we had not had that. But as the circumstances changed in Cleveland and Cuyahoga County and many Fortune 500 companies left and no public funding, it became much of a bigger issue. So we started following the planning process and some of that convening with the idea of making the case for support. Some of you may have seen this particular piece that was developed, the case for public funding. This is the first time that we had put down on paper why the arts really matter and are deserving of public support, and what is the urgency? Why did we need to act then? This case statement that we built was informed both by polling data and also by work that we did in the community to just get a sense of what messages really resonated with civic leaders and public leaders. So once we knew what the case was, we had to determine what the ask was. So what you're seeing here is a list to the right side of this screen that looks at an assessment of total local government funding in a set of 9 cities against the cultural spending at the time. And so you could see the percentage of investment that was being made in relationship to sector spending. So we used that information, that idea of ratio of local government support to total cultural spending, to determine the dollar amount that was needed. The average was about 9%. When we came up with the target at the time, which was around 14 million, we came in a little bit lower than that average. This was a study that we did in partnership with Wolf Keene's company. So you have the case, you know how much you need, and then you have to figure out how funds would be used. And at this point, there had never been any sort of real significant public investment in arts and culture. And so the commissioner at the time, Peter Lawson Jones, formed the Cuyahoga County Cultural Leadership Task Force. I was a member of the team that staffed this project. And we went through a number of phases to ultimately come up with what investment models could look like in the event we were able to secure a revenue stream to support public funding for arts and culture. This was a 16-member community task force. We did 9 public meetings, and we did a discovery phase where everybody learned together, which was public, and then followed that with a public comment. We did a design phase where we looked at different models and then ultimately came up with the ones that we thought made sense, and then a public comment, and then ultimately came up with the final investment models that went through 2 additional public meetings prior to a commissioner resolution to adopt investment models. Why did this matter at the time? There was no existing sort of methodology for this, and a lot of concern about not having a plan for these dollars, given some of the skepticism over the county at the time. And so we knew going in that how these dollars were going to be used was going to be a critical piece to securing buy-in from a lot of different people. So we come out of that case-making period with the idea of the need to bring people together. We did that in a number of different ways. The first one, for folks who may be familiar with it, was the Cuyahoga County Cultural Roundtable. And we would come together to learn about civic issues. We would learn together about other issues from arts and culture. We would connect with one another, talk about the strategy regarding the arts and culture sector and particular public policy, and explore the civic landscape, understand what those things were that were happening in the environment that we were operating from. So this was like one of the first opportunities that the arts and cultural community had to come together as a community and discuss shared interests and concerns and really act together. Our first opportunity to act together came with the Health and Human Services issue 15. This was an issue that was on the ballot, and there was some real concern that it wasn't going to pass. This was our moment in the arts community where we came together, learned how to be a team player, saying, hey, these are our quality of life partners, and we need to make sure that they are adequately supported. So for a lot of us, or I can say for myself, this is actually the campaign I learned to campaign on. We distributed about 63,000 pieces of literature. People did curtain speeches, send out emails. There were 4 radio spots recorded by cultural leaders. There was monetary support that came in. We did a phone bank night, poll working, yard signs. So this was really that moment where we started to come together as an arts and cultural community and really get behind another issue and show that it wasn't just our own issue that we cared about. It was about others as well. So coming out of that, we had an opportunity. This was at a time when the convention center was being the first stab at trying to get a new convention center in Cleveland. And the idea was to increase the sales tax to pay for this convention center, and the remaining funds would be split 4 ways. When the distribution came out, we were not going to get, I didn't say 4 ways evenly, I said split 4 ways. And we were going to have to generate a significant amount of revenue to support the campaign, but get only about 10% of the remaining funds. So we came together through the Cultural Roundtable and talked about this and what it would mean. And eventually, the arts and cultural community said, you know what, we really want to get behind this, but this is really not our moment to get our funding from this. So we'll absolutely support this, but we'll find another way to get support. And when we as CPAC took that charge and took that to the commissioners, and as it happened, it changed some thinking about some things, and the decision was made to redistribute those dollars evenly among everyone. The deal ended up falling apart, but that paved the way for another opportunity for us. So in 2004, there was nothing on the March ballot that year. And Commissioner Peter Lawson Jones saw an opportunity to test an arts and economic development issue with a property tax. So a few key facts about this, some of you may remember this. The source of funds would have been a property tax. The cost to homeowners about $20 per $100,000 of home value. It would have raised about $20 million annually, split half between arts and culture and economic development, and would have lasted about 5 years. And we were polling at 28 points in favor to start. So we weren't starting out in a really good place. You all know, or maybe you don't know, that we don't have a property tax for arts and economic development in Cuyahoga County. That ballot issue did not pass, but we really gained a lot from it. First of all, we learned how to raise the money. We got a lot of money, and we ended up on the final results side 47% in favor and 53% against. So we weren't far off from passing it. And as a result of that, it meant that people in the civic landscape really couldn't turn away from this idea of arts and culture funding as an issue. So the big question coming out of that was, if this is an option, what are our options now? A lot of people think that the cigarette tax was sort of that first thing, and part of the rationale behind sharing a lot of this with you is helping you understand that there were a number of efforts along the way. We had 2 strategies going at the same time. There was the idea of a sales tax. Again, the sales tax hadn't been increased for the convention center, despite the peeling away of a temporary increase in the sales tax at the state level. So the Board of County Commissioners was considering an executive order looking at 1/4% and 0.5% increases in the sales tax. This would have raised, as you can see on the screen, $7.5 million at the 1/4% and $20 million at the 0.5%, but it would not have been a dedicated revenue stream. The cigarette tax, on the other hand, would have required legislative amendment to the Ohio Revised Code that governs regional arts and cultural districts to allow us to use the cigarette tax. And I'll explain a little bit about why the cigarette tax in a second. It would have required a ballot resolution, a campaign, but would have also generated $18 to $20 million annually and dedicated revenue stream for arts and culture. So why the cigarette tax at the time? The precedent for funding quality of life issues in this was with regard to stadiums was through this mechanism. And Ohio cigarette tax was far below that of other states. And we knew that that would also have positive health benefits. And so, again, the cigarette tax was not a primary strategy, but for many of you who know, it was the one that ends up winning out. But how did we get there? Ohio Revised Code has within the code a section that is devoted specifically to creating a way to fund arts and culture through regional arts and cultural districts, which is what Cuyahoga Arts and Culture is. At the time, the only tool available in the code was a property tax, and we knew that that wasn't going to fly. And so we knew that we had to make some changes in order to unilaterally form the district in Cuyahoga County. Required a legislative amendment, and we did this in 2004, to allow a county with a city in it that had a population of over 500,000. Basically, we had to make the change here to allow the county to unilaterally form the district because the population of the city of Cleveland had dropped below 500,000. So when we did that, that was successful. In 2005, we introduced cigarette tax permissive language. And what permissive language is it says, we're not asking you, state legislators, to increase the tax in Cuyahoga County to support culture. What we're asking you to do is give us the permissive authority to go to the voters, to ask them about whether or not they're willing to allow us to tax this thing in support of arts and culture. We introduced the cigarette tax language that year. It was a budget year, so it's very similar to what we're experiencing right now. And at the last minute, it got pulled for a number of reasons. One of which was that the tobacco lobby had come in, tried to make a case regarding how this would not be a good idea. And we had to go back to the corporate community because there were some phone calls made and folks really weren't up to speed and needed to make sure that they were up to speed. So we went back and we tightened up those things, got support from a few key corporate leaders, and ultimately were able to pass the permissive language into the code that would allow us to put this before the voters. Many of you probably will remember this, maybe some of you don't. This is issue 18. The case was largely made around economic development and education, and just generally quality of life. So I want to just say one of the things here about this one. The polling data gave us a good sense about what level we could go into in terms of support. And we did go into it aggressively and got the authority to do $0.015 per cigarette. It was a 10-year lifespan, or it is a 10-year lifespan, and it is limited only to counties with a population over 1 million. We did have opposition, tobacco wholesalers, convenience store owners. The length of the campaign was about 17 weeks, cost about $1.4 million. And in the end, we passed it, 55% in favor, 45% against. So the bigger issue here now is what have we learned from all of that effort? As we know, the cigarette tax was renewed in 2015 at one of the highest levels of a local issue in county history. We renewed at 75%. So a few key things. Going into all of this, we had a shared vision that was contributing to unity in the field. Unified messaging is really important. Message training is an important part of a unified front. The case for support. It's critical to bring people along from the very beginning. And the case for support and public relations were established well before we had a policy solution. So you'll remember in the order of things, when I started to talk about making that case, that very first thing that we talked about was why. What was the need? What is the urgency? What is the impact of arts and culture? Why do we need to make a public investment where we've never done so before? Field engagement. Ongoing field engagement from the very start was critical for allowing the field to act quickly on opportunities. You'll recall when I did the rundown and the timeline, there were many opportunities that became available to us pretty quickly, and we need to be able to have the field acting together. Funding distribution. Knowing how the funds would be dispersed, both the process and the destination. So how they were going to be how the decisions were going to be made, who was going to make them, were they going to be open and transparent, and all of that was critically important at the time. But also knowing who was going to get those funds was really important for buy-in. And on the buy-in front, local buy-in was key to achieving successful statewide legislative action, particularly from the corporate and public spheres. So that first time in 2005, when we went to get the legislation changed, we needed greater local buy-in in order to make that happen, which is why we had to go back and do some work in order to make it possible in 2006. Permissive language is key to securing lawmaker buy-in. The folks at the state level, lots of politicians, just watched something on this last night. Nobody wants to be the person that says they're the one that's going to introduce a new tax. But the idea of saying, giving the authority for a voting populace to be able to decide whether or not they want to tax themselves is something that people really, really appreciated and would get them on board for. Partners. Be careful who your partners are. In the event you're not going alone, as you know, we ultimately did go alone, but your fate being determined not only by the perception of you, but by the perception of your partners. So in the case of issue 31, it was arts and economic development. And while everybody really understood the arts message, they didn't so much understand the economic development side and who was going to manage that and how that was going to be distributed. And so that was a big challenge. Diverse steering committee was key. So what's changed since 2006? Politically. So shortly after the permissive language amendment was adopted and then passed in Cuyahoga County, legislators moved to make it more difficult for new local option taxing authority. In fact, these moves almost, and let me be clear about that, almost prevented Cuyahoga County from being able to renew the cigarette tax to support arts and culture. So, we've generally seen a cooler attitude toward local government at the state level. Arts advocates around the state will be watching for efforts to amend 3381. As you know, or maybe you don't know, that we're the only county that has the authority to do what we did with the cigarette tax. Campaigns are requiring more time and more money. As a note, I just want to say here that we were successful in making it possible for us to continue to renew the tax. And so anyone that might have any concerns about that, so long as we renew the tax before it expires, we can continue to put it on the ballot. Structurally, so many people confused by this. When we started, it was just CPAC. And over time, we needed the Regional Arts and Cultural District, Cuyahoga Arts and Culture was formed, and then the Arts and Culture Action Committee. In fact, actually the order was, us, then the Arts and Culture Action Committee in order to manage the campaign, and then together, then we get Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, which you all know, and has done just a tremendous job in terms of distributing public resources in a transparent way. Also, we know that the tax has declined. If you look at the first 10 years of the tax declined almost 26% from inception. There is no shared vision uniting everyone concerned with arts and culture. The last arts and cultural plan was really developed over 20 years ago. That doesn't mean that there haven't been some efforts to really think about moving forward, and I'll just sort of give a shout out to Cuyahoga Arts and Culture for their Cuyahoga Voices and Vision work that they did a few years back. But more broadly, in a larger arts community driven vision really is not in place. And the arts and culture sector is really structured in a lot of smaller groups. So we have the wonderful thing about the Arts and Cultural Roundtable, or as it evolved over time, was that it contributed to a spirit of people coming together in lots of different ways. The Cleveland Music Club Coalition, Collective Arts Network, Cleveland Arts Education Consortium, the list goes on. And those are very, those things popped up once public funding got passed to solve some of the distinct issues facing those specific groups. The result, though, is that those are smaller groups that are meeting as opposed to one larger common group. And I will say that, as pressure on the cigarette tax happens, that those divisions, we want to work hard to make sure that everybody is still staying together with a united vision and in a united cause around making sure that the arts and cultural community is adequately supported. From a public opinion perspective, public opinion towards arts and culture is really strong. And this is evidenced by, both the renewal rate of arts and culture funding, but additionally, we're living in a time when it's a little bit more divisive. So transparency and inclusion will be even more important to achieving success. And from an impact perspective, the impact of arts and culture is so widespread. When I think about where we were in 2003 and even before that, and look back to where we are now, or look at where we are now in terms of 2019 and the way that arts and culture has engaged community and become connected on a wide array of civic issues, it's really so striking, and that's so impactful, and that's really so wonderful. And we have so much more data on impact and engagement to help with case making at this point. All right, so now I'd like to hear from you. So the question that just popped in the chat box is, when do we need to put a new issue on the ballot? So let's start with the existing life of the existing cigarette tax. So the cigarette tax was renewed in 2015 and wouldn't come up again before 2025. When it comes to the subject of a new tax, I think it's really important. Let me just share with you what we're doing right now. And that is a situation analysis, trying to understand where are we. As you know from this presentation, one of the first things that we did was to look at and build the case for support. Part of the reason why we were interested in asking you some of the questions that we asked you was to try to get a feel for what's going on out there right now. What are the unmet needs? Where, what are you feeling? What's happening? Because that helps us, along with all of the other data that we have, to begin to understand what the real needs are. And you'll know, again, remember back to that making the case for support, we talked about that. We looked at the impact, we shared that, we discussed what is urgent, why is it urgent now. We can't just sort of assume that because this is an issue that's of high priority for us in the arts community, that that's something that's shared. And so we need to make sure that we're getting information to see where the arts and culture sector fits as a priority for others as well. So those are the kinds of things that are going on right now, determining that need, figuring out what is that target that we need to be at to secure additional support for arts and additional public support in light of the decline in the existing tax. One of the things that I'd like to ask you to do, and we didn't do this from a polling perspective because we knew that it would be important to hear from you directly. If you can think about, and perhaps put this in the chat box for us, what are those unmet needs that you have at this point? Are there specific types of dollars that you're having a hard time securing to support your work? Are there projects or aspirations that you have, or partnerships that you are thinking about engaging in, but where all the parties are saying, this is really great and this is right, but we can't seem to get the support that we need? That's the kind of information that we need to hear from you right now. So I want to clarify. One of the comments was this is particularly challenging for institutions that provide benefits. Oh, like human resource benefits, like pension, and to be able to get qualified candidates and have good talent. Are those the kinds of things that you're thinking about? Is that what we're interpreting correctly? Healthcare. Got it. That's great. Thanks for sharing that. Leadership training and human capacity building, grants for expressive arts therapies, training outside the arts. Okay. So can just to clarify that, training for programming in the arts by people that aren't in the arts, like other community organizations. Am I interpreting that correctly? Yep, I've got it. So any other thoughts about this or about that question, feel free to feed those to us at any time. Understanding what your pain points are is really, really, really important for us. The more that we can hear about what those pain points are for the field, and what those opportunities that you see are to do work and have greater impact at the same time, all of that is really important to us. So please feel free to share those with us. I want to talk a little bit about what you can do at this point. One of the things that I talked about early on was how we came to each other's aid. And in that case, with Health and Human Services, it was a Health and Human Services issue. But we also need to be supporting each other inside the creative industries. If you can, participate in the Public Officials Recognition Breakfast on June 21st at 8. This is a great moment for us to be able to talk to and make connections with public officials, hear what their thinking is on an array of things, but also share with them the important work that we're doing and the critical need we need to, the critical needs we have to make sure that the arts and cultural sector is adequately funded to achieve the kinds of things that this community has come to expect. And the idea of the arts cross-sector relies on a strong arts and culture community, and we need adequate resources to be able to support that work. And this is a great opportunity for folks to come out and share your own messages, make connections, talk to people, and just feel a part of something bigger than yourself. You can train your board on advocacy. As I noted early on in the presentation, we will regularly come out and do a basic advocacy training for nonprofits if that's the need. For individuals, if you want to learn a little bit more about what you can do, we can direct you to some of those resources, so feel free to reach out on that front. It's always important to be engaged with the public funder. I mean, they're doing so much out in the community, and they've really done some great work lately to try to connect and get that public support out into a lot of different ways. And it's, it's good for us to keep up to speed on what they're up to and show support. Invite legislators to your events and share your stories with them. They love this. You'll be surprised. They really like to be out and about, and so I would encourage you to do that. Or schedule time to meet with legislators in your district. And I'll put this out there for you. If you have, if you need a partner, if you're a little bit nervous about that and you want someone to come with you, I do this all the time. I'm very comfortable sitting there, and we could tag team it or triple team it or whatever you want to do. But if you'd like to meet with your legislators, talk to them and hear what they care about and ask them how arts and culture fits into their priorities, it's always time. There's always room for improvement when it comes to arts and culture public funding, but without a doubt, it is clear to me and to others that public funding has really changed the arts and culture sector for the better in this county, and we can't allow the decline in the tax to erode that progress. We have to make sure that investment is commensurate with return, and we have to continue to act together. But the first part of this process is really helping people understand the impact of what you do and feeding to us the needs that you have so we can begin to make others aware of that work and the sense of urgency to make sure that the arts and cultural community is adequately supported.